Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. In this raid video I'm going to take a look at the damage masteries, the final tier 6 damage masteries, Warmaster, Helmsmasher and Giant Slayer. Which one should you choose? Spoiler alert, actually all of them have their uses, but which one should you use when? That's what we're going to answer in this video. First, thank you Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video and for giving me this wonderful promo link down below in the description there in the QR code. New account with Deacon Armstrong after the tutorial, Uugo at 15, Tagoar at 20, Mausoleum Mage at 30, a wonderful start to raid. So let's start with Warmaster. Warmaster has a 60% chance to deal 10% max HP damage to champions and 4% max HP damage to bosses. This happens once per skill and per target, so AoE can proc on multiple targets. The damage from Warmaster is affected by all the usual modifiers. Target's defense, whether you have a weaken on them, any ignore defense effects, any decrease defense effects, they all affect the damage you get from Warmaster. And the damage is also capped against major bosses. Like against Hydra, for example, it's capped at 50,000, although weaken can actually make it higher than that. So what Warmaster does is Warmaster adds a bunch of damage to DPS champions, but it also enables even support champions to deal a fair amount of damage, as long as they attack anyway. So for example, I like having Warmaster on Tagoar, because Tagoar also attacks while it's healing. So Tagoar's heal is actually also an attack. But then when I have someone like Rectordrath, whose heal effect does not attack at all, so Rectordrath is not attacking very much at all, then points on that Warmaster just seem kind of wasted on her. Then we have Giant Slayer, which functions very similarly to Warmaster. It's a 30% chance to deal 7.5% max HP damage to champions and 3% max HP damage to bosses once per hit. So this one favors multi-hit abilities. Giant Slayer, basically the choice between Giant Slayer and Warmaster is, are you multi-hitting enough? It's again affected by all the usual modifiers, target's defense, weakens, ignore defenses, decrease defenses, base damage again capped against major bosses. So Giant Slayer is used on champions that have a triple hit A1 skill. So your first skill, their default skill, has to be a triple hitter in order to pick Giant Slayer. And if it's triple hit, then Giant Slayer is a good option. Because Warmaster adds on average 6% max HP damage per skill, 10%, 60% of the time. Giant Slayer adds 2.25% per hit. So a 2-hitter, that's 4.5%. 3-hitter, it adds on average 6.75%. So Giant Slayer becomes an option there. That's the champion damage, but the ratio remains the same against bosses as well. So if you have a triple hit A1 skill, if you have a support with triple hit A1 skill, say someone like Apothecary, for example, then Giant Slayer can really do some things. So Warmaster and Giant Slayer are kind of clear, but then things get really complicated with Helmsmasher. Helmsmasher has a 50% chance to ignore 25% of the target's defense. So damage reduction from defense. So we need to understand a bunch of things here. Damage reduction from defense, it's a logarithmic function, diminishing returns. So the more defense you stack, then the less effect it's eventually going to have. And whether Helmsmasher is going to be good for you depends on how much damage you deal per skill use. So even if the target has low defense but you deal just ridiculous amounts of damage, then Helmsmasher is eventually going to overpower the others. But also, most crucially, how much defense the target has. Because Helmsmashers, the main criteria for choosing Helmsmasher is that your target has a very high defense level. That's when it really starts to shine. But then it only starts to shine if you're able to stack some decreased defense or ignore defense on top of that Helmsmasher. I'm going to show you some numbers later. And also as a more minor consideration, whether your damage skill has an ignore defense component, because then that ignore defense would stack with Helmsmasher, but it would not help the Warmaster damage. So that could also be a little bit thing. But the defense of the target is actually the most important thing when choosing Helmsmasher. And you also need those decreased defense and or ignore defense skills. And in those, it's important to realize how they work. So decreased defense and ignore defense, they stack. Defense is first decreased by the percentage of decreased defense, and then of the remainder, a percentage is ignored according to ignore defense. And if you have multiple ignore defense effects, they stack additively. So you get 25% from Helmsmasher, if you have 35% from Merciless, well, together those are 60%. And the damage reduction by defense is a logarithmic function. This is not my picture. I found this from Reddit from several years ago. And this is still the valid formula for that damage reduction. So as you can see, you get pretty good reduction around 3,000, 4,000. and somewhere after 4000, adding more defense just doesn't give you all that much more damage reduction. And Helmsmasher has a sweet spot where it works better, and stacking other effects pushes that sweet spot further. So once you can ignore enough defense, then even if your opponent has like 10,000 defense, no PvP champion would have 10,000 defense, but there are several bosses that do have 10,000 defense, then reducing a little bit out of that 10,000 doesn't do anything, but suddenly when you reduce enough, then your results will skyrocket. Remember, the other effects that you use to ignore defense and decrease defense also help Warmaster, but Helmsmasher can be that final cherry on top that just becomes the best option. So I made this graph myself about the damage increase percentage of Helmsmasher when it procs. Note that it only procs 50% of the time, so your overall damage increase is only half of this. And this shows Helmsmasher alone, the orange line. So that's how much damage increase percentage-wise you get hitting different defense targets with just Helmsmasher. And note that the x-axis jumps around a little bit because I wanted to include all these different types of bosses here so that you can really compare well between them. The actual curves are smoother if you would just have the defense. So the orange line shows that if you have only Helmsmasher, no other decreased effects, then it first starts by doing pretty much nothing, then it starts to get better, and then it falls down and becomes really, really weak, as the defense becomes so high that the ignore defense from Warmaster just cannot lower it enough. But if you add other effects, decreased defense, ignore defense, to Helmsmasher, then that moves the point where Helmsmasher becomes good later and later. Also note that Warmaster also benefits from this. So for example, if you have like minus 60% decreased defense, you probably want to have it against something like a Demon Lord, then you actually don't get much from Helmsmasher at those defense levels, because you're already decreasing defense and that additional decreased defense doesn't do much. But then when you go into something like Nightmare Hydra, then you're suddenly getting a lot of value out of Helmsmasher, because your decreased defense doesn't really get it all the way to the sweet spot yet, but then the Helmsmasher becomes the crucial part that really makes it shine. So when should you use Helmsmasher? The most important thing is the defense of your target. Hydra is Helmsmasher's favorite playground because the decapitation mechanics that increase damage on those heads, that really favors Helmsmasher. But mostly on Brutal and Nightmare, it actually doesn't do a whole lot of anything on normal and hard, and it can even be detrimental. Also, hard Doom Tower, hard Cursed City, lots of opponents with 8,000 defense, 10,000 defense, even 12,000 defense. So here Helmsmasher can shine, but not alone. If you put just Helmsmasher, it doesn't do anything. You have to have at least the decreased defense, maybe some ignore defense, in order for Helmsmasher to actually do something there. The final hard stages of dungeons, say like hard 10 Dragon, okay, Helmsmasher time again. For Chimera, maybe Nightmare, but really mostly just Ultra Nightmare. So again, if you do normal Chimera, hard Chimera, Helmsmasher doesn't really do much. And then PvP, there's some opportunities for Helmsmasher on nukers because you just want enemies to die instantly, and they don't have as much health either. But when you make the decision to go to Helmsmasher, you're actually going to lower your damage against many of the encounters. So this is when you're already at these very hard encounters, and the damage that you deal on easier encounters does not matter. You already have so much surplus that you don't mind losing damage. Because, for example, Demon Lord. Demon Lord's defense is so low that even for Ultra Nightmare Demon Lord, I actually did the math on, well, when would Helmsmasher become the best? And it becomes the best when your damage per skill exceeds 1 million damage. So if you have a minus 60% decreased defense debuff on the Demon Lord, and you don't have any other ignore defense effects, and your character hits Demon Lord, and it deals more than 720,000 damage with that single hit, now you're at the point where Helmsmasher starts to overpower Warmaster. If you're not at that point, Warmaster is going to deal more damage. So switching to Helmsmasher for Demon Lord most likely is going to decrease your damage. If you're at a point where you're like barely one-keying Demon Lord, for example, or not even doing Demon Lord progress, you don't want Helmsmasher. It doesn't help at all, it's going to hurt you. Then if you take like normal stages, normal dragon stage 20, you need to be dealing more than 400,000 raw damage per skill to make Helmsmasher good. So if you have the decreased defense debuff up, you don't have any other ignore defense effects, you have to be hitting for over 180,000 on average. So of course, like if you have one skill that deals that your big damage skill, and most you're hitting with an A1 for like 30,000, 40,000, yeah, you're probably not going to be there. The Helmsmasher again is going to decrease your damage. So the whole point is that Helmsmasher is going to help in much harder content, and you have to have all of this other content already trivial so that you don't mind that you will lose damage on this content when you switch to Helmsmasher. Normal Doom Tower, Helmsmasher doesn't do anything. Normal Cursed City, there's some stages in the very end where Helmsmasher can be useful, but like the Cobblestone Market, Helmsmasher doesn't do anything. And Helmsmasher obviously is also only for damage dealers, because you need that base damage in order to increase a percentage of it. So if you have supports, then supports will continue using Warmaster or Giant Slayer for pretty much all eternity. And I cannot emphasize enough that there is no strict point where, or at least not an achievable point, where you would say that, hey, this character is so good that Helmsmasher on it and it's going to be better everywhere. Because that character is actually going to be worse in much of content when you switch to Helmsmasher. But if that content is trivial enough, you can afford that, and Helmsmasher is going to help you in those very late stages of Hydra, very late stages of Chimera, hard Doom Tower, hard Cursed City. So yeah, as I said, it's a little complicated to understand, but that's how Helmsmasher really works. Thank you for watching. Click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and a special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, YouTube members and Twitch subscribers who make all of these videos possible.